Hello, hello. Welcome back. This is part 2 of our Design Psychology 101 lesson. This will be a different format than last week. If you haven't listened to last week's episode, which is Design Psychology Part 1, highly recommend hopping back and listening to that first, because that's really going to give you a good baseline understanding of how science and research work in interior design to get optimal results. And this week we're going to be talking about some of those techniques we use in interior design. And for each one, I'm going to give you the psych says, followed by ideas to actually implement the concept so you can really get creative and hopefully inspired to try some of this out in your own space. These design concepts will uplevel any interior space and turn any sized home into a happy home. So I'm really excited to geek out on this today and really happy you're here. Thank you so much for being here. With all that said, let's get into it. So first up, we're going to talk about color. Design psychology says that colors have a major impact on mood. The definition of color psychology is the study of how different colors affect human mood and behavior. It explores how colors can influence emotional responses. As you can imagine, this is going to be pretty important in interior design since we want to use our environment to influence emotional responses. Color is a big tool in being able to do that. So I'm going to include in the show notes a chart that breaks down all the colors and the most universal responses that have been found to those colors. I'll read a couple of them here, but I am going to include that in the show notes. Just want to add my caveat. You heard me say this last week, that the best science can do is tell us the probability, but this stuff is going to be highly personal. So it's something that, someone might have a trauma response to a certain color and have a very different reaction than what 95% of people that were studied did. And that's okay. This is where design gets really, really personal and really depends on you and your specific feelings and needs. So just keep that in mind, that this is what most people have been found to respond to in these colors. That does not mean that that's going to work for you. So that said, let me give you a couple examples. Reds and oranges tend to bring feelings of energy and passion. So you don't see a lot of bedrooms that are bright red, but you may see this more in office spaces, fast food restaurants. You think about places like McDonald's. There's a lot of reason that those colors are chosen. Now, the color blue is very interesting, and I might do a whole episode on this at some point. But blue is known to be very calming and evoke a lot of relaxation in people. And recently, there have been studies shown that the color blue actually decreases heart rate and blood pressure, which blows my mind a little bit. Super fascinating. But anyway, we can use color to make a space feel more expansive or contained. You may be familiar with the idea of painting a small space light colored or white. That is because it's going to reflect more light and make the space feel bigger than it actually is. And vice versa, if we're working with a very expansive space and we want to create a little more intimacy, we can use a darker color that won't reflect the light to have that outcome and create that feeling. Before you get into color, it's really important to consider the function and feel you want to have in each room. And this is something that we do in the design project Jumpstart. I go through with clients. It's really important to know how you want each room to function clearly and how you want it to feel. Those two things are both of equal importance, and I think the feeling part is often skipped. So it's really important to lean into that. How do you want to feel when you come into the space? Bedroom's a really kind of cheap example, but I'll keep using it because typically people want to go into their bedroom and feel relaxed, comfortable, calm. So we want to do whatever we can, color being one of our tools to do that, so that we can achieve the desired effect in each space. Next up, keep it clean. You may be wondering, what are you talking about? That doesn't really sound like a design tip, but it is. And this is actually going to refer to clean as in tidy, and also clean as in clean, wiping surfaces, that sort of thing. And we're going to talk about both. So design psychology says that mess and clutter has been shown to increase cortisol, stress hormone, and can reinforce fatigue and depression. Might do an episode coming up on specifically on cleaning and the mental health benefits because it just really fascinates me. This is something I recommend if you are having a blah day, just feeling depressed, down in the dumps. One of the best things you can do for yourself is to get up, force yourself to clean your space. Guaranteed it will make you feel, I'm going to go on a random number. I have no evidence to back this up, but I'm willing to bet that you will feel at least 10% happier having done that. So the easiest way to think about why this affects our mental health is this equation. Visual noise equals mental noise. So if you are sitting in a hoarder's hut with crap all over the place, bottles, I have a friend whose car feels like this, just bottles and wrappers and stuff just piled in the back seat, that is going to make your brain feel the same way, that there's stuff everywhere. So it's going to create more thoughts, probably more anxiety. And similar to the physical environment, your mental environment's not going to feel organized. It's going to feel totally all over the place and probably more stressful. One design tip that I really like, that I think Marie Kondo might have been the first, if you're familiar with the Kondo method and Marie Kondo, she wrote a book called The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up. Highly recommend checking that out. But she was the first that pointed out that having bottles, so even if you think you have a hand soap next to the sink, something like that, if it has a label, that is additional visual noise. We could get into why that label, how that was designed to grab your attention and color and verbiage and all of that to make you want to purchase that soap bottle. I won't go down that rabbit hole now. But one idea that I found really effective in my space, you know I live in a very tiny space, is to replace any bottles that are going to be exposed, like soap next to the sink, with just a plain glass bottle. Now, for other belongings that usually result in clutter, there are two things to do. One is going to be try to find storage that isn't exposed. So that would be closed cabinets, in a dresser, putting things in drawers. Boxes and baskets can be really handy storage solutions to, again, just minimize the visual clutter in a space. For the items that we do want to have exposed and on display, if you will, we want to be really intentional about the staging. I have a blog post on layering, which talks a lot about how things can be displayed. I might do a whole episode on this in the future. Let me know if this is something you'd be interested in. But even books on a bookshelf, the way that they are arranged and displayed has a huge impact on how that reads visually. You've probably seen Pinterest photos, or the home edit does a lot of these kind of rainbow displays. So arranging your books by color, that's going to have a different feel than just a bunch of stuff piled, in different directions haphazardly on the shelf. It's going to have a different feeling. It's going to feel more organized, and it's going to reduce, having it intentional is going to feel more intentional in our brain. Again, our physical space, our mental space is going to mimic the physical space. So if we can have intention and organization in our physical space, it's going to relate to our mental space as well. Another example would be like dirty dishes piled up all over the kitchen counter and sink. Having those dishes washed and put away, it's going to feel a lot lighter, a lot more organized in our physical space, so our mental space will feel that way as well. And then I did want to touch on just something that I'm not sure a lot of people are aware of in terms of cleaning, like wiping down surfaces and that sort of thing. Actual cleaning, not tidying. And that's going to go back to light. I don't want to go down a rabbit hole of natural light and how it works, but similar to what we talked about in the first one with lighter colors reflect more light, when things are covered in dust, the light is not going to reflect as well. Windows is a big one because that's actually where natural light's coming in from, right? So if your windows are smudged or dirty, and a lot of times we don't notice how dirty our windows are, especially on the outside. When you go wipe it down, you will see how much is coming off of there. It really does make a big difference to how the space feels on the inside. So keep it clean. Number 3 is space it out. And this kind of piggybacks on the last one, but design psychology says that humans respond positively to open space. Basically, it's saying that our brain space is equated to the physical space that it's in. So more space equals more room to think and mentally explore. It's one of the reasons that psychology says nature, being in nature, is so good for us. One of many reasons, I should say. So some things you want to think about in terms of implementing this is furniture should be arranged with the consideration to the flow of traffic. How are people going to move through this space? If you're walking into things, not only is that not functional, it's also going to take a toll in your subconscious because you aren't able to literally move around. Typically, this isn't always, but typically you're going to want to avoid blocking openings. So like entrances into rooms, doorways, windows. Typically we don't want to put furniture in front of those things. Again, trying to keep an open space. Subconsciously having those spaces accessible and easy to go through makes our brain, our mental state feel more expansive as well. You want to try to have a balance of the size of pieces. So we're talking about the scale of the furniture you have now. You don't want to have, I'm thinking of like Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Lazy Boy, giant overstuffed furniture. Maybe you want to have a large overstuffed sofa, but you want to have a balance. You don't want everything in the room to be super large, or for that matter, the opposite, and be super small, because it's not going to have the right weight in the space. It's all about balance. So we want to have a mix of both typically. Small spaces, very aware that you're going to have to think small so it fits in the space. But that said, even within small pieces, there's going to be a range. And you don't want to go with too many small pieces because that's going to feel cluttered. So this can be a tricky conversation, but just think in terms of scale that you want to have a balance. There should be a mix of sizes in each space. The other tip I like to throw out there, even if your space is already carpeted, an area rug can really add a lot to grounding a space, especially in like open spaces. A lot of our floor plans in the last 5 to 10 years have become very open. Having an area rug can really help define a different zone. So if you have an open kitchen and living space, having the rug in the living room can tie those pieces together and further the feeling that this is its own little space within this larger space. And it also really helps feel grounded. All right, y'all, we are going right through it. We are on number 4. And number 4 is natural light. So design psychology says a low daylight diet is detrimental to physical and mental health. And this is shown in so many studies. This one is one of the ones you might already even be familiar with in terms of design psychology because it's been studied in mass and the results are so clear. It goes as far as saying that low daylight can actually diminish visual acuity, vitality, happiness, social and cognitive development, as well as academic performance. So again, when we're looking at examples of this, I used to work in workplace design, so office interior design, and this was a big one because companies that are building offices want their employees to be super productive. And the studies show a clear correlation in how lots of natural light increases productivity. It increases the performance. There have even been recent studies that have linked a lack of sunlight to increased blood pressure. All right, so putting this into an implementation setting, here's what I would suggest thinking about. Typically, the rule is the more the merrier. Let as much light in as possible. If you are designing a new home or doing a renovation, we can think about things like windows, door openings, even door treatments, putting a glass insert into a door, doing glass French doors to allow the light through. But a lot of us aren't in a position where that's an option. So how can we implement more natural light in a space that has already been built? We can go back to color and think about maybe using paint, a lighter paint color to reflect light throughout. Can think about mirrors and other materials through furniture and decor that might help reflect light throughout that space. The other thing I would suggest is look at your windows. What's covering them? Do you have heavy drapes and shades? If so, I would suggest losing those and opting for something that filters light and maybe gives options. Because the other thing to think about is that the sun moves throughout the day. So you might need different levels of shade as the sun moves through the space. I like to think about when you're at a hotel, usually they have that kind of sheer, they have 3 layers of curtains in a lot of them. That's kind of what we're thinking. You'll have something that will let a lot of light through, something that would let some light through, and then a blackout option. And you don't have to go that far in every room, maybe in a bedroom. It's going to depend on your space and how the light hits in your specific scenario, but that would be a good place to start. Number 5, bring nature in. We just talked about this one a little bit, and similar to natural light, I feel like this is one of the more well-known aspects of design psychology. But we're going to cover it anyway because it's important, and we'll talk about some ways to implement it in your space that you may not have heard of. So psychology says, and again, there is just so much scientific evidence showing this, there's been so many studies on it, that there are tons of benefits being exposed to organic nature. It has become widely accepted as a huge tool for stress reduction, anxiety reduction. There's a lot of reasons for this. I'm going to give them a bigger shout out at the end. But Donald Ratner wrote a book called My Creative Space, where a lot of this, especially the scientific stuff, comes from. And there's a lot of different theories about why our brains respond so positively to nature. One is kind of an evolutionary theory that while we were roaming the desert plains, our ancestors were, coming across lush green spaces equated in their minds survival, because of water and food and whatnot. Another explanation, and again, this isn't either or, it's probably all of these are correct. I'm just going to touch on a few, but that's a great book to check out if you're interested in kind of the details of all of this and all the theories that are out there. But the other main theory out there is that nature is often fractal. Fractal refers to a shape being repeated at different scales, and that happens a lot in nature. I'm trying to think of an example. Could think of like a fern leaf has a similar shape to a wave, an ocean wave. But anyway, so because these shapes are similar, it doesn't take as much mental energy for us to visualize them. And when we think less, we're more relaxed and there's less stress. And we talked about last week Ulrich's study with the hospital patients. I'll just briefly cover that in case someone's here that hadn't listened to last week's, where half the patients have a view of hardscape, the other half of the patients have a view of the park, treetops, and the patients that had views of the treetops were healed faster, in better spirits, just a slew of positive benefits for those patients compared to the ones that didn't have a view of the park. So this is going back to that. Now, how to implement it. The most obvious one, bring in some plants. It has been proven that faux plants have the same effect as real plants. Now, there are a couple, benefits to having real plants, like they clean the air and this sort of thing. But if you are someone that is just a plant slayer, can't do it, consider a faux plant. I use faux plants a lot when I'm designing for Airbnbs. So there's, you don't have to have the responsibility of taking care of a plant to get this effect. A faux plant will also do it. Think about how your furniture is situated. Optimize views. So can we place our furniture to be looking out of windows? And even if you don't have windows, we can always look to art and decor. So mirrors could be placed strategically on a wall that doesn't have a window to reflect a window on an opposite wall. We can also use scenes of nature. So a painting of a forest or a landscape and hang that. And that has been shown to also have a similar effect. This next one is one of my favorites because I think it's often overlooked. Number 6 is round it out. Design psychology says that curved objects make us happy and less fearful. I'm not going to go into all the theories as to why. The most kind of accepted one is another evolutionary theory that angled things were more dangerous to our ancestors. So things like animal teeth or jagged rocks. While rounded shapes, like a baby or foliage, signaled safety. So you want to think curved over straight. If you're in a position where you're designing a new space or considering a renovation, we can think in terms of architectural elements like arched doorways or fireplaces. And in established spaces that we don't have the luxury of, rebuilding, redesigning, we can think about how to add curves in our furniture and other decorative items. I often opt for round decorative mirrors over a square because it brings intrigue and balance to the space. Architecture, it really tends to be angular. Lots of right angles in architecture, right? So it's a nice break. It's a nice visual break for our eyes to flow over something round. I love a round coffee table. It's another one of my go-tos. So think round. Look around your space and think, where can I add some curvature? How can I soften some of these angles? Number 7 is make it beautiful. So design psychology says, and there are lots of studies and more recently neuroimaging to back this up, that humans go into a more positive state of mind when inside a beautiful space as opposed to one that is ugly or mediocre. We talked about this last week with Maslow's room study. Not going to go through it again here. Go listen to last week's if you haven't yet. The takeaway is that humans are drawn towards beautiful things and feel better when they're surrounded by them. And beauty is personal. So I recommend just going through each space and take note. What feels beautiful in each space and what doesn't? And that's a really good starting point. Just to have one room. What feels beautiful and what doesn't? Number 7 is make it all about you! Exclamation point. I've kind of been talking about this throughout, but that's okay. It's because it's so, so important. And psychology agrees. Design psychology says that we are all different, which is why we really need to design our spaces for our particular preferences and lifestyle. One of the biggest challenges is understanding how to infuse your own style and personality. That's one of the most important jobs of a good interior designer, is to help a client understand their own style and personality instead of trying to implement a textbook decorative style. When you understand how you use your space, it will really guide the design. And not only will it guide the design, but it also really guides the project because it guides budget prioritization. And that is one of the reasons this is something that I do in my design project Jumpstart before moving on to implementing a larger design project. These are the basics, the basic understanding we need to come out with that successful outcome. I always recommend spending the most in the spaces that are going to be the most used. And that's going to really depend on on the home and also whose home it is and who's living there. I just had a client, we repurposed her formal dining room in her home into an office because her kids are out of the house and she needed a real space to work out of and not just, opening her laptop at the dining room table and packing it up. And she found she wasn't using that dining room. Her kids are gone. They're not having family dinners like that anymore. When she entertains, she doesn't even host people at that table. They have a big kitchen with a big island, and that's neither here nor there. But the point is, someone else might need that formalized dining space. Another example would be sofas and beds. Because we tend to use them, most people tend to use them a lot, spend a lot of time on them. I typically advise that we find, a high quality sofa or bed because, again, you're going to be spending so much time in there. It's worth the money to make sure that is an aesthetically pleasing piece, but also comfortable because you're going to spend so much time on it. And if someone tells me they don't really go in the living room or family room and watch TV very often, they just kind of go in there when they have friends over or something like that, there might be somewhere else that we want to allocate the budget to. Kind of went down a rabbit hole there, but hopefully that makes sense. So that brings us to the end of this episode. I feel like I could have done this for another 3 hours, but I doubt you would have wanted to listen to me for another 3 hours. So we'll call it here. But I really hope that this has given you some good context and background to how psychology and science dictate interior design. And also given you some ideas how you can make your house a happier home. If you'd like to chat about working together or about anything, I'd love to connect. There is a link to schedule a free chat with me, as well as my email and socials, all located in the show notes. And I've also linked Donald Ratner's book, My Creative Space, which I mentioned earlier. It's where a lot of the science and statistics in this are sourced from. And I just cannot recommend this book enough. If anything that we've been talking about in terms of interior design and psychology has interested you, he goes real deep. So there's lots in there. He comes at it as he's very focused on creativity. So a lot of the book is about how to create a creative space. But that said, there's a lot of really useful information in there that you can use to create spaces to evoke whatever emotion or feeling you're looking for, even if it's not a creative kind of workspace. So that is going to be linked there as well. As always, thank you so much for being here. It means the world to me. And stay tuned next week for another great episode on the Nomadic Spaces podcast. See you then.